Well, thank you, Kristen, and I do expect to hear your voice as we go along here. In fact, you're going to be my tag team partner to make this as interactive as possible. And so, thank you for pioneering that. At least it's pioneering for the library. I know for some people on this Zoom conference right now, you may not have ever taken a poll. It won't be like the poll in November, which is going to be just one vote. Tonight, we're going to have over 20 votes that you can cast. And so, I know this is Chicago, but we're not going to be promoting any kind of multiple voting at the booth, obviously. So, and I have no one in the audience to chuckle or to kind of grimace when I say these things. So excuse the corny humor as we go on throughout. A little disclaimer that that is certainly part of my makeup. It's now 7:07, and I'm aware of two numbers. One number is 3. That's how many more minutes before the White Sox and the Cubs start to play tonight. So I hope that doesn't cause people to go away, because it's the stats that happen in that game don't count. Okay, this all counts. All this is for your life day to day. And the other number I'm thinking about is 8:30, because I think that's the general time when we're looking to wrap things up tonight. My plan is to go until around 8:10 or so with the main portion of the program, and that will include interaction for almost every step of the way, where you'll be voting. And when I say voting, it'll be casting your guesses or your absolute confident answers as we go through what I call Go Olympics. And we'll get to Go Olympics soon. We won't have an Olympics this year, but you get to have a Go Olympics tonight. And so, so we'll try to, pace it so that we don't get bogged down too much in any one area. I start to go off on tangents. My whole life is one big tangent after another. And the one thing that my family can count on is that as we go out and about in the world, before too long, I'm making some numerical observation like, oh, up to 10 to 70% off, and the 70s in big caps. And that preposition up to could be 0, right? And so anyway, I'm already off track with some of that rumination. But the first thing I'm going to do is share something that for all of you to see. In fact, I believe, Kristen, these are documents that people will be getting after the program, or have some of them already gotten them? I'm trying to recall.
I did send those out this afternoon. Well, it was actually
maybe it was yesterday.
I'm distracted now. I was critiqued for saying and now I'm super conscious about it. And there I did it again. So
that's okay. We won't.
Apologies.
The official transcript won't say
I did send them out about 6:30, I believe.
Okay, so some
email. You should have received that if you registered last minute, then maybe I did not get to send that out.
Okay, all right. So some folks have gotten what I'm about to display here, and the real ambitious ones that had time might have actually already clicked onto it. Now what I'm going to do is find this document that we're referencing so that we can share it. And I shared it in our little practice session earlier, and now I'm challenged in finding it. So hold on a moment while I pull it up. When you go figure, and there's always one of these moments in all of my programs where I feel like, okay, what in the world is happening? So let me get this pulled up. But these principles that I'll be covering when you go figure, make numbers count. So confusion and vagueness you will surmount is what we're about to go into. And it'll just touch on some of the different principles that I think are so important that go into day-to-day communication. So like, I've been doing this for 19 years, right? So the one thing in terms of the median, when we talk, and then I'm not showing it right now because I'm not finding it. It's a part of my brain that I can't access it to find a document. But when we're talking about median, right? If you have a family of 9, either the youngest or the oldest, someone who's number 5 out of 9 is the median. There's half that are older and half that are younger. And so when people think about averages, oftentimes they are thinking in terms of what is a mean. So a mean is you take a whole set of numbers and you divide by how many are in that set, and that is the average, right? So someone scores 20 points a game, well, you just take all the number of points they scored divided by game. But if someone were to score 100 points in one game, 0 in another game, and 5 in a third game, the median is the point at which half of the data are above and half are below. That's median. It's two very different ways to represent an average, okay? And so that's, and then there's a third way, which is mode, which is the most frequently recurring number. And these are all things that you can find on the internet. These are all things that I've written about, that others have written about, that you've learned. So the key isn't so much the definition, it's to understand when to apply these things, and also to ask questions of the communicator. Sometimes it's a newspaper story, or it's something online, and it's often not even in the same moment as when the communication happened. You're finding it later. It's a breadcrumb that's been left on Twitter or somewhere in the world, and you're left with trying to discern what is it that they mean by this, and are they actually, is the communicator giving you enough information to actually make an assessment about what that number is or is not, right? And so it's really, really a tricky thing. And with our election cycle in 2020 here coming along, there's clearly going to be a continuation of a slew of numbers on both sides of the spectrum politically that are putting forth their point of view. And so just a moment, I'm going to find this. I am determined. In fact, Kristen, I know I sent it to you, so I'm going to look into my sent file. So that's one thing. Another principle that I want to talk about, though, is the little stump speech I give on the word or the term of several. How much or how many is several, right? And we'll go into that a little bit later on today. But what's interesting is the frequency with which that number pops up in our life. And so I will give you an example. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times had back-to-back paragraphs. I think it's maybe even the same paragraph where they used the word several twice. And so it's something that is just rampant in our culture and in our language. And sometimes it's really not a big deal, right? It's really just, it's a way to give an approximation. But there are other times where it really does make a difference, right? Where it really can be used in a misleading fashion. And so here we go. So this hopefully popped up on the screen now is this sheet that I've been kind of tap dancing around. And so going into several a little bit, though, is to think about how much or how many is several, right? And especially if it's preceding a word like thousand or million or billion, and then all of a sudden you've got a pretty skewed range of what we're talking about. And in some cases it's innocent and it's not really that big of a deal. In other cases, it can really be a crucial fact that is either someone hasn't done the job to really drill down to get it, or they don't want you to know that. And so, you know, when I was in journalism school, one of the first principles that they taught me was, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out, right? And so the whole idea behind that was to not take things at face value, to really dig in and go behind the initial question, right? And to figure out what is really, you know, what's the truth, really. And that could be really an elusive thing. So onto the sheet here. For the mean, add each number far and wide. Next, note the number of figures and simply divide. So what people usually mean when they talk about average is mean. All right, so that's a little memory device for y'all. I need memory devices like crazy. Mark Van Eegen made John sit up nearly perfectly. That's the planets. Mark Van Eegen was a football player, and I chose that to be my memory device back in 1979. Okay, so so in the same way, when people talk about average, it usually means mean, but it's not guaranteed, right? So you have to, you know, ask those questions of the story to dig into it. Using too many digits can make your audience seethe. So use an information box, let your story breathe. So this was initially geared towards journalists. And so one of the mistakes and tendencies of any storyteller, but especially in journalism, I have found in my career and what I would do oftentimes, I'm guilty of all these sins over time, is rather than trying to give the most important numbers and data points for people, was to just throw everything but the kitchen sink at people. Because as a reporter, sometimes I'd be overwhelmed and not really know. And so out of fear of missing out or leaving out a crucial data point that maybe of a budget story, I would just break down every single department. And then people can just get overwhelmed, and therefore you're not helping people discern, okay, what is the key thing this year? And just a little, maybe it's not such a secret, but so often journalists will not pursue a story, or will only pursue a story so far because we get in over our heads. We don't want to drown and commit something that's an atrocious mistake. Instead, we'll stay on the safe land and report on what we know. And as a result, a lot of stories don't get told adequately or at all because it's, journalists are expected to become instant experts and be able to turn it around. And so it's very, very tricky realm. So another point on the lower left side here, fastest growing this, biggest dropping that, always be wary of any hyphenated stat. When we talk about fastest growing, let's say the fastest growing state in the United States in terms of the number of COVID cases, right? Now, one factor to really keep in mind is fastest growing over what span of time? Is it the last day, week, 2-week average, et cetera? And also, what's the actual raw data, right? So if one state was doing particularly really well and minimizing the caseload, but now it's going up a bit because the smaller something is, the easier it is to grow, then it can seem like, oh, wow, XYZ state is the fastest growing in terms of the number of deaths. All right, but what's the raw data? And what, more importantly than that even, is what's the per capita data, right? Wyoming is the least populated state in the country. California is the most populated. You would expect there to be about 70 times more deaths, all other things being equal, which of course they are not, because there's rural versus, urban, and there's so many different facets as well that go into it. But you would think there'd be around 70 times or 80 times more of anything in California to Wyoming. Again, setting aside cultural differences and other demographic differences those states have. With percentage change, don't you dare settle. Obtain the raw data to show your mettle. And so, people oftentimes will say, well, do you want this or that? I want it all. I want to have all the data available to me as a consumer or as a communicator. So then I can just decide what is the most effective and responsible and clear way to communicate the information, right? And so, so that's what you ought to think about is, okay, what's lurking behind this number that maybe isn't so obvious on the front end, and therefore you can dig deeper and be more and judge the information a little more clearly. All right. With numbers huge and small, just convert to another size. That way your audience can see it with their eyes. And so there's a saying of seeing is believing, but there's another saying that I have thought of, which is seeing is understanding. Right? And so if you can actually see a point that is being made rather than just numbers on a piece of paper, it's a lot simpler to imagine it. And so let's take, I guess, COVID's on the brain. And for those who came here to escape that, I apologize, but indulge me this one more time, at least for now, for this minute. But let's say the number of deaths in the United States related to COVID, and it's around 140,000 right now. And so people can picture stadiums. They can picture Wrigley Field if you're in Chicago. There's around 40,000 seats in Wrigley Field. That's about 3.5 times the size of that stadium. And so that's one way to picture that number. Now, another number to keep in mind, though, is what's the population of the United States, right? And that's about 1/3 of a billion, 330 million roughly. And so how do you put that into some kind of a context? And that's why we have per capita rates. That's why in Illinois, we are trying to determine which states we need to be more leery of people coming into the state based on what's their per capita rate of COVID cases happening in those states lately, right? So stepping back, and I'm going to try to really use other analogies for the rest of the program. I think that'll be better for all of us. I'm going to skip down to be on the alert for cuties, quantitative terms, numbers dressed up like words spill out like a can of worms. And so, by the way, Jesse Jackson did not help me in writing this, though he is the rhyming king of our times. But if you remember only 73 things from tonight, I want this to be one of them. See, I don't like it when people say this if you remember one thing. If you only remember one thing, that's bad. But in this case, cuties, just the proliferation of numbers that are disguised. And it's just the way we communicate. But if you don't see a numeral, it doesn't mean math isn't happening, right? So if you just open up any book, any magazine, turn on any broadcast, numbers are going to start to tumble out, or at least data will. But it won't always be. In fact, the word always, right? Will not is a country is, so that's the absence of something. So there's some sentences that I'll say where it's 75 or more percent are cuties, quantitative terms. And someone asked me before, so do some networks on TV use cuties more than another? And I said, well, I've not done an analysis of that, and that'd be really an exhaustive thing to do and exhausting. But cuties in and of themselves aren't good or bad. It's just that they are, and it's important to be aware of them is really the whole point. And then sometimes they might be being deployed in the service of some agenda. And so it's to just be mindful of that. So the next point is more of a principle of making money on interest. It's just a cool thing, the rule of 72. If you don't know about it, this kind of goes into it. You can Google it for later. Another thing related to cuties is fudge figures. Consider several, some, and many. Sometimes you need to be precise right down to the penny. So there's some instances where precision is really important. So one example is in the 2000 election in Florida. They couldn't just round it off, right, between Bush and Gore. It went down to the percentage point with a little over 500 votes separating those two candidates. With surveys, 30 years ago, I worked in a survey lab at Northwestern. It was a graduate course I took at the end of my time there as an undergrad. And then I worked there as a survey taker and did a little bit of supervision. And it was really important back then to really have a certain discipline of how questions were asked and who we asked. And one example was if someone answered the phone, this is back when phones were actually attached to the wall and hardly anyone had a cell phone back in 1990, and they pick up the phone, and we would not necessarily want to talk to that person because that person was already displaying by picking up the phone a bias of being more outgoing or something about them that we wanted to kind of account for. And so we would ask, can you let me know who the adult is in your house who had the most recent birthday? And so that was a way of trying to get at the person that would kind of help create a more scientific and precise measurement of the public's viewpoint on whatever topic. Now, of course, we're relying on the person who we didn't even know being honest about who that was, right? And so automatically we're talking about dysfunction being introduced into measurement, right? And so just like people, numbers are dysfunctional because they come from people. But how the questions were posed, who paid the cash, holding a survey to scrutiny can debunk it in a flash. And so how many surveys do we never see the light of day because they don't give the results that the company or the candidate wants to portray, right? And so it's really important to understand who's funding the survey, what bias do they have, things like that. And then there's also the averaging of surveys, which I think is a very helpful thing. There's a website that Nate Silver has established called 538. So 538.com. And on that site, among other sites, they actually list a lot of the different surveys out there in the political realm. And then they grade the surveys from A all the way to F in terms of the quality. What kind of rigor do they have in how they put together the surveys and the results that flow from that. So you can assign it the weight that it should be assigned. And of course, subjectivity is embedded in all of that. So upper right-hand corner, I guess geographically this would be Maine if this is a country. What would you do, or what should you do with an overly specific stat? It's time to declare rounding off is where it's at. So there are times where to go into all the minutia, 17 decimal points to the right is needlessly specific. And so to get man on the moon, which happened 51 years ago today, by the way, to do that, we need to be really, the NASA engineers have to be very precise. But in general, you don't need that in life. A budget, so covering budgets, and this is just like anything, any kind of a policy in the political sphere. It's a fact of life as certain as taxes and death related back to people. Now your story has some depth, and so that's the thing that as a journalist, when I was in that realm, was always hopeful was to trace it back to human beings. What effect does this have on people in this community or in this particular part of the country, whatever the story may be talking about, so that it actually has meaning, right? People care about other people more than a lot of just jargon or policies that are kind of viewed in some kind of a vacuum. So behind every number isn't some quantity bigger. At the heart of it all is a human figure. And the moral of the city, what it's all about, when someone tells you a statistic, be sure to check it out. All right, and so that gives you just kind of a sense. This is a little preview of what we're going to go into, and this is the part where Kristen is definitely going to become much more part of this program with sharing of Go Olympics and the questions that flow out of this. So this is the part where we're going to seek a little bit of indulgence. Now, Kristen, can you see this?
Yes, I can see that.
The Go Olympics quiz. I want to make sure before I forge ahead that people can actually see this. And so for those of you who received this and are able to open this, you can look at this at home. But stay with me, all right? You'll be able to look at this for the rest of your life. You can look at these questions, but with each one, my goal is to walk through it and give some perspective that isn't necessarily on the page here. But as we do it, with each question, Kristen's going to bring up a poll, and it's more of a quiz for you to then provide your answer to that specific question. So let's get going. Each letter of Go Olympics equates to a category. It's around 2 each. There's a few variations from that number. And so for G, we've got great moments in political numbers history. So without further ado, let's go back to 1948. And I've actually had some people in my programs in the past who actually voted in this election. Not that many. I could probably cite 2 or 3 different people. But you didn't have to be alive in 1948 to know the story of Dewey defeats Truman. There's the Tribune headline that Harry S. Truman is holding up, and kind of a little bit of vindication because the Tribune got it wrong. This was a limited number of editions, by the way. I used to freelance for the Trib. So in full kind of fairness, the vast majority, I'd say 95% or more of the editions for that day got the headline right, got the story right. But some of the early editions that they put out there in anticipation of this happening was based on, in part, on flawed polling going into the election back in 1948. And so the question, and the poll question that Kristen's now going to flash on the screen is, what was a significant flaw of those 48 pre-election polls? Were they conducted nearly a month earlier? Was that the problem? Did they exclude female voters? Or were they done entirely by telephone? And I can see the numbers coming in. Feels like the Jerry Lewis telethon, right? For those who remember that. And here comes the numbers. So this is cool. First time we've done this. And so I didn't know that we'd see the numbers as they're happening. I don't think the attendees can see this, but Kristen and I are observing these numbers coming in. And for most of these questions, we're going to give around 20 seconds. For this one, we're going to give a little more just so you can adjust. And at this point, 15 people have voted. 5 people are either feeding their cat, they've turned on the Cubs game, or they're just not going to vote. So we'll give a few more moments. But right now, and now if you want to click end polling, Kristen.
Will do.
And this is fun. So now I think everyone hopefully can see, can the 16 people who voted see this? That 10 people
shared the results. So
okay, all right. So I'll just talk this through for those who can't see it, or they just to guide us through this. So 10 people said that they were conducted nearly a month earlier. That was a flaw. That Truman had a late breaking push that helped him get over the top. That is not the correct answer. 2 people said that they excluded female voters. That is not the correct answer. The correct answer is they were conducted entirely by telephone. So here's the thing. This is not just a 72-year-old, oh, that's a neat story. What's the modern day application? So what happened is, back in 1948, people who had telephones tended to be Republican and vote for Thomas Dewey, the governor of New York, who, by the way, he lost in 44 as well. But that historical digression aside, back in 48, right, people voting by phone or answering a survey by phone were more inclined to say they supported Dewey. And so that's why that gave a distorted picture of Truman's chances as the election unfolded in November of 48. And so in 2020, though, what's an analogous thing to that, right? In 2016, there was a whole heck of a lot of people who just weren't truthful to pollsters. I mean, after November 8th of 2016, there was a lot of people trying to figure out what happened. This was not anticipated. And so it's a thing in terms of social media or through phones, through texting. What's the manner by which people are being polled, and how accurate is that actually measuring it? And so that's why it's so important to have an average of polls these days, because no one poll is going to necessarily be the end all be all. So thank you for that, Kristen. That was really fun. Let's go to question 2, and I will scroll down on my screen. And Michael Bloomberg, back in March, you may remember Mike Bloomberg was running for president way back before we know what hit in mid-March. And he spent over $500 million in a 3-month span before dropping out on the day before Super Tuesday. I'm sorry, the day after Super Tuesday. So what proportion of Mike Bloomberg's net worth is $500 million? And so is it 9%? Is it less than 1%? Or is it 2.7% of Mike Bloomberg's net worth was expended in this? So, and this is just kind of a quick little point. Don't put much thought into this. You could Google it and know the answer. But the whole point, though, is to understand that for him, it wasn't a heck of a lot of money with any of these 3 options compared to most people's net worth. I mean, the median net worth in this country, the median of a household is about $100,000. Okay, half have more and half have less. Now the mean is around 10. Wait, I'm sorry. Yeah, the median is about $10,000. The mean is around $100,000. Okay, because the mean can be pulled up by people who have millions of dollars, right? They can bring up the average. The point is that okay, so let's end the polling, and we can see from here, and it's kind of fun. Those who are participating can see where your answer compares to the whole group, and so in this, people did well. There's less than 1%. So people were savvy to the fact that Mike Bloomberg probably made more money than he spent in that 3-month window, because he makes money differently than Kristen and I, at least. Maybe there's some other multi-billionaires on here. Okay, and so it was less than 1%, and so that helps provide perspective, and also maybe there's people that have concerns about how people can have so much money and have so much influence based on that. So, and also in terms of net worth, what is net worth versus what is annual income? 2 different things, and we'll go into that later when we talk about the national debt. Oh, how fun that will be, versus the national deficit. 2 different animals based on different time horizons to keep in mind. And so, but as the political race heats up and all these terms are thrown around, it's to really be mindful of, okay, what specifically did they say? Does that actually hold up to scrutiny? So, on to question 3, and we had a 6% increase in the number of people taking this, right, from 16 to 17. That's a 6.25% increase. So good job, everyone. So on to O, obvious observations, and I'm a fan of alliteration. So between July and October polling last year, there's this whole. In fact, let me pull up this screen. People can't really see. So Tulsi, you already got a vote. Folks can't necessarily even see. What?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, let me
pause the polling.
Yeah, can you pause it for a sec? And we're going to go to a graph.
We'll relaunch that. We'll do it again. Okay.
So should I click relaunch, or are you going to do
that? Did you want to show something first?
Yes. How do I? Let me. So I'm going to screen share. Okay, a new share. Here we go. Very good. Let me go back to the GoLympics, and here we go. So can you see the screen, Kristen?
The presidential election poll of college students?
Yes. Yes.
Obvious observation?
Yes, with Warren at the top, and then Trump, Sanders, Biden, so on down. So all these different folks. So Axios, which is this news outlet that's emerged the last few years, co-founded by a former Washington Post reporter, and has a daily digest that I find to be really insightful and interesting. So they released these poll results in October of last year, and it shows Warren at the top with 19.5% at that time. And this is of college students, and it shows to the right their change from July. So for instance, with Warren, it was a 5.8% increase from 13.7% to 19.5%. For Trump, it went up from 16.3 to 17.4, and so on. And you can see the arrows up or down for each candidate. And so as I scroll down here, between Gabbard was at 1.5%. She had been at 1.3, and she went to 1.5. Sanders was at 15.1, and he went to 15.5. So the question is, whose support grew by a faster rate? So Tulsi Gabbard from 1.3 to 1.5, and Sanders from 15.1 to 15.5. And so if you could go to that poll, Kristen, and let people at this point vote based on those numbers. So whose support grew by a faster rate? And so the numbers are coming in. We have 10 voters so far. Let's try to get to 15 voters if we can. And so it's kind of close to neck and neck. All right. And it's not a total, A to Z comparison. It's a little nuanced here. And so I can see where there's a little bit. So let's stop the polling. And we got to 18. So Bernie Sanders is the answer by 10 folks, and 8 folks said Tulsi had a support that grew by a faster rate. And the answer is Tulsi Gabbard, because she went from 1.3 to 1.5, or was it 1.1 to 1.5? Let me remember what that was. She was at 1.3 to 1.5. So she went up by 0.2 of a percentage point, but she went up by around 15%. And we'll get into this later, okay? No one should go hide under your bed or anything with whole discussion of percentage point difference. We'll walk you through this, but it's important. Sanders went from 15.1 to 15.5, and that's only an increase of 0.4 over 15.5, which is, about, oh, wait a second. Am I contradicting myself? 1.3 to 1.5. Yeah, she went up by 0.2, right? 0.2. Right, she went by 15%, and he went up by around like 3 or 4%. Okay, overall in terms of his increase. And so it's tricky with the decimals, but the point is, because she had a smaller share in the first place, it was easier for her support to grow by a faster rate. And that's just an important principle I want to convey. So when someone's an underdog or has a really small size in the first place, it's easy for them to make a claim that they're fastest growing, because they had such an easier, time to go up. The bigger they are, the harder it is for them to keep going and to go higher. And so inevitably there's a bottom and there's a top. And so if someone's popularity ratings are really low right now, right? Some people in DC right now, there's a popularity rating that's pretty low for a certain sitting president. At a certain point, that's probably going to go up, because it can't go much lower, right? Based on the base that this president has. And so that could be heralded at the time as, oh my gosh, see, he's rising. Well, rising from where though, and to where? So it's to really stay into the equation all the way through and not just listen to a piece of it. So I think I beat that one into the ground. Let's go on to the next question. I'm gonna skip even the next little question on there, I think. So Kristen, if you could bring us to polling number 4, we might need to skip over it in the interest of time.
Okay, so skip, which question?
Yeah, let's see what 4 is. Let's take a quick look, make sure. Are you able to relaunch that, or?
Between July and October?
Yeah, let's move on from that. I already beat this one to a pulp. So we'll just end that one. We won't even go. And so, okay, Tulsi won that one just because I'm going to end that one. So relaunch, polling. All right, I'm gonna get my hands off the steering wheel. I'll let you do it. Go to question 5. So since Donald Trump became president, and here's a point I'm going to be making here. I'm going to bang the drum on a certain principle of numeracy, math literacy. Since Donald Trump became president, the Washington Post has tracked false and misleading claims that he has made. In coverage of prior administrations, the Post has tracked a number of previous presidents in terms of their per-day lying habits. The question is, how many other presidents' false and misleading claims have been tracked? Because we know President Trump is not the first president to say a lie. So how many prior presidents have been tracked by the Post? And so there is a right answer, but there's no shame if you give the wrong answer. You got 2 out of 3 chances. As Meatloaf said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Don't be sad. Okay, that's the hokey 70s guy in me saying that. Okay, we got 14 votes cast so far. Let's get up to 16. All right, we got to 16. Like, oh, see, it's like magic. Let's go up to 80. All right.
Oh,
so
sorry.
did you close the polling? That's fine. So we get up there. So, all right. So 11 folks thought that it was 2. 4 thought it was 9. I want the 2 who said 0 to give themselves a pat in the back, because the answer is 0. Doesn't mean that there's never been a lying president before, okay? It just means that the Post never tracked that issue in such an assiduous manner. And so to this point, President Trump has been chronicled as having. So before I go into a little bit more on their work on that issue, just the phrase "a number of" is something that is acuity, and it can be deceptive. So I said a number of people have been complaining to me about Kristen's use of the polling process there. Well, 0 is a number, and so you would never read a story where someone said the adjective council member pushed back against the ordinance vote, right? You would say the adjective, the belligerent, the exasperated, the talkative, some adjective would go in there. You would never say adjective. But sometimes we let other people, and we ourselves might get away with saying, I've told you a number of times to please pick up your socks. Not that anyone's ever asked me to do that, right? And so just be careful of that. It can be kind of trivial and innocuous, but other times it can be misleading. So of the first 1,267 days in which President Trump was in office, they chronicled over 20,000 false and misleading claims, or nearly 16 per day. And this is just data that I'm sharing. I'm not making a political statement, it's just numbers. According to the fact checker reporters, has the daily average of Trump's false or misleading claims risen or declined since the COVID-19 pandemic hit the US in March? And so I think that might be the next question. Yes. So since COVID hit the US, has the average number of false and misleading claims gone up or down? So that's the question at the moment. And we will see. So there's an emerging trend here with the answers, and a few more moments, and you can close that anytime you want, Kristen.
All right.
And in this case, 80% of you are correct that yes, it's gone up. It's gone up pretty dramatically, actually. And that's acuity, pretty dramatically. What is the number behind it? I don't recall off the top of my head, but I will say that it's gone north of 20 on many days. And the average used to be only, around 12. About a year ago, I think his average was 12. Now it's, over 16 or nearly 16 per day, encompassing the entirety of his administration. So we don't know how often Jimmy Carter lied. We don't know how often Reagan lied, or Bush, or, William Henry Harrison. Did he actually utter a lie in his 30 days of office? The guy was just dying the entire time because he talked too long, which is a reminder for me to move to the next question. He talked too long at the inaugural, 68-year-old guy trying to show how strong he was, and he caught pneumonia. All right, lessons and morons. Okay, like that one? Lessons, morons. So let's go to the poll, please. I'm starting to snap my fingers like I'm a talk show host, Kristen. Have you noticed that? A $4.27 million cut in the government body's funding is the least the government can do, good news for taxpayers, or it's meaningless without more context. And people are blazing through this. There's only one answer that people are giving so far. Did somebody get the notes? Okay. All right, my job is done, Kristen. I'll see you later. Everyone got that right. So meaningless without more context. All right, and that was, without diminishing the good job you all did, that was kind of a layup, right? I mean, the first two answers were kind of glib and silly. It's meaningless, right? Because we don't know what the overall budget is. We don't know what that's going to mean in terms of what services are lost because of that. Are they finding a new way to create revenue that will fill this gap in some other way? We just don't know. And so it's important to not have just a number dangling out there in space, without some kind of a way to connect it to the rest of the relevant information. So good job, everyone. Well done. And now we're on to the next question, which for Lessons and Morons is, as of early July, so you can flash this up onto the screen, the US federal debt had soared over $26 trillion. On a per capita basis, how much approximately is that overall figure of $26 million? So per capita, meaning per person. So the denominator is the US population of 330 million roughly. And so what is the per capita roughly? You could all take out a calculator and do this. I just want to see off the top. But the important thing is that to know what, to trace it back to a per capita and to think in terms of inflation-adjusted dollars to prior administrations, to prior decades, generations, centuries, and so on, so that you have some context, right? And so when Babe Ruth was traded from the Red Sox to the Yankees, you know, in today's dollars, that was millions of dollars that the Red Sox got. See, it wasn't a COVID analogy, but it's a painful one for me. I'm from Boston. Okay. And so the correct answer is, and most people took this survey, and yes, most people got this right, or half the people, 7 correctly answered, $80,000 is the approximate per capita debt that our country has. So now the next question beyond that is, so what? Is this something that we should be worried about? And I'm glad you asked. Some say yes and some say no. And when I say some, I mean some experts in the field who talk about to what degree should we be concerned. And so obviously this year with what's been happening, and a lot of people have been falling on hard times because of the cataclysmic nature of the pandemic, you know, there's been just a surge in even more debt going out. So time will tell, but there's long-term consequences of all these things. So you know, it's trying to judge a trade in a sport the day of the trade, and no games have been played yet to see. So anyway, good job for the 7 of you, and the other ones that guessed, thank you for guessing, and we'll go from there. All right, so let me scroll. And Kristen, are you able to see the screen as I'm scrolling down, or no? But you know here's where it's good that you've shared this with people. They can follow along at home with their own PDF.
Yeah, I'd say like we're kind of looking at the middle of 2 documents right now. So
okay, yeah, it's a little bit of a.
So you could keep it closer to the top, I think, because we can't see the full page. We're only seeing like the top
part of it. Okay, so after lessons and more, I'm going to go to yes or no. Okay, so this is going to be a binary section. Real quick, I'm going to give people 10 seconds to answer so we can blaze through this. Yes or no? A 100% increase is another way of saying something is doubled. Yes or no? You got 5 seconds. You're in jeopardy. If you don't fill that answer before Alex Trebek gets to you, you can forfeit all your money.
Right.
Okay, I turned the screws on some people. Okay, so yes, so 13 out of 15 correctly answered that. So 100% increase is the same way as saying something is doubled. And so that's important to know that the same thing, 2 different ways of putting it. So a 200% increase is the same as tripling, right? Now, which is clearer to me, to say something has tripled is clearer in my mind than saying something has grown by 200%. So, right, or 500%. If someone's gone up by 500%, then it's a times 6 factor. So it's just to kind of make a decision as a consumer or as a communicator, which way you're going to go with that. Okay, the next question is, the last time the percentage of registered voter turnout exceeded 60% in a presidential election was 2008, when Barack Obama was elected. Yes or no? The last time. And people are coming in with pretty rapid results here. And here we go. So, by a slim margin, the group got it wrong. No shame in that, because he got 50, it was like 59%. It was 1968 was the last time it actually was 60% for registered voter turnout. Now, 1968, that was when Richard Nixon ran and won after Johnson decided not to seek another term in the midst of all the Vietnam War and so on. Now, we're going to get to another question right now, in fact, that's tied into this. So, because what is registered voter turnout? So, Kristen, if you could bring up the next question. In any story you encounter, voter turnout always means only one thing: the percentage of those who voted from among the number of registered voters. Yes or no? Okay. This is fun. Are you having fun looking at these numbers coming in, Kristen?
Yeah.
It's another close one. And okay, it looks like we've got all 18, because I think 18 is the most that have voted in any one question. And so the answer is no. Again, by a slim margin, the wrong answer was guessed by people, but it was close. And how do I know this? I've looked it up and I've tried to find some common ground definition of what voter turnout represents, and it's all over the map. And so one thing to think about is that what's the percentage of eligible voters, people who could vote, they have no limitation on being able to vote, but they're not even registered to vote. And that's why there's all this push by some people to register more voters. And it's ballpark 25 to 30% of adults who could be registered aren't even registered to vote. And so when you look at the numbers coming in on election night, whether it's locally or nationally, it's to keep that in mind, that it's usually a minority of people. I mean, when Bill Clinton won in '92, he got around 40% of the vote, because there was Clinton, there was Bush, and there was Ross Perot, who got around 20% of the vote himself. And so it's a plurality that often is what is the difference. So go register to vote is what I would say. That's a little bit of a nonpartisan exhortation if you're not already. I have a feeling pretty much everyone here is registered to vote if they're on this call. Okay, on to the next question. We're on to medians, modes, medians, modes, means. These are the different ways of expressing an average. And I touched on it earlier. Of the 3 M averages, what do people usually mean when they say average? What do they usually mean? I'm kind of staring, folks. I hope if you know what I mean. What do people mean when they say average? So a few more moments and we will close the survey. And people were taking my cue well. They listened. So usually it's mean. So 13 out of the 16, 81% who answered this question got it correct. Mean, okay? Median is a relevant thing in some cases, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So let me actually, I used to have this in the quiz. I've changed the quiz over time to really keep it up to date. So let me give a quick example to make it clear on, okay, why do averages get used in some cases, not others? So the smaller the set of numbers there are, so if there's 19 people in a group, and then in walks Bill Gates, and now we're asked, okay, has the median income in that room changed very much? The answer to that is no, because Bill is over half, his wealth is more than the midway point. But if it's $1 more or $1 trillion more, it doesn't matter. But the mean has been skewed dramatically because he pulls everyone up to make it seem like everyone's a billionaire, because the average is now in the billions, right? Because we're taking all the numbers and then dividing by 20 with him in the room. And so that's an example where with a smaller set of numbers, mean is a dangerous thing to use in terms of trying to depict typical, because average is really about trying to find what is the typical. And so in a population of 330 million people, 140 million households, right? It's harder for even a billionaire's income to skew it that much more, right? And so that's why I said earlier that the net worth of a household in America, that the mean wealth is a little over $100,000. The median is about $10,000. Half of the households have less than 10,000. So that's where it's to know what are the averages and what are we talking about. Okay, I'm all M'd out on that one. Let's go on to the next question, which is looking at, in fact, I'm gonna share this screen. Well, you know what, I'm not even just gonna share the screen because just for the sake of brevity and the point, this was a chart that showed about 10 or 12 different candidates with different levels of support. And so you had on the far right with hardly any support, like Tom Steyer, and Amy Klobuchar was really on the low end. And then on the far left, you had Biden and Warren and Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, right? And so 6.9% was the number that, who had that number? Doesn't even show up here. Oh, you know why? Because it's a certain average, right? So the question, and folks, on your handout at home, this is number 11, and it shows Biden with 27.2, Warren with 23%, and so on. The answer is all of the above. That's the moral of the story. I'm going to end the polling just because I didn't really present this very clearly right now, but the point is that all of these can be seen as the average. And so the bigger message I have is to really be aware that when all these things can be the average, you have to really look at the word average in a different light and with some level of real caution. Okay, so because the mean was around 7%, there was 14 candidates altogether, and so all over the map. But the 1%, 1.4% was what popped up most often. There was like 2 or 3 that had that number. Hence, I called it. You can call it an average because everyone else had 1. So it's a really misleading data point. All right, let's go on from that to percentages. Remember earlier when I was kind of trying to reassure people that the difference between percentage point change and percent change. In Illinois, we've got an interesting thing with the income tax. Let me just give a quick example of how this can be portrayed in much different light. The income tax for state income tax in Illinois went from 3% to 5% around 7 years ago. Who remembers that? So it's now at 4.95%. Wow, that was such a break. But the point is, it went from 3% to 5%. That is a 2 percentage point increase. It's not a 2% increase, it's percentage points. Because if someone was paying $3,000 in taxes before, now they're going to be paying $5,000. It's a $2,000 increase. It's an actual 67% increase in a 2 percentage point increase. Both are factual, but one is more clear about what's happening. It's a pretty dramatic increase in state income tax, right? And so for those who are, I guess, more inclined to want to minimize or to kind of soft pedal the increase, they say, well, it's just a 2% increase. No, it wasn't. It was a 2 percentage point increase. So on to percentages. And this is actually from just in the last week, a national, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, Quinnipiac University survey released on July 15th found that Joe Biden has the backing of 52% of registered voters compared to 37% for President Trump. This means, and this is where we can pull up that poll, that Biden was ahead of Trump by 15 percentage points. He had the support of 40% more voters than Trump did, or both of those statements are true. Ahead by 15 percentage points, had the support of 40% more voters than Trump did, or both. So it's a little bit slower polling happening, which I understand. People are accessing parts of their brain they haven't used in a few decades, maybe, a few days. So we'll just be patient. We have 2/3 of the votes come in, almost 3/4. Good job, everyone. All of these results are being shipped to your middle school math teachers, by the way. Just kidding. This is for your own edification. Okay, we can close the poll now. And thank you. And so 13 out of 16 got it right, that both of those statements are true. So just to really quickly give you clarity, it's a 15 percentage point lead, and 15 divided by 37 is 40%. So it's 40% more people are expressing a desire to vote for Biden than Trump. Okay, so it can seem like, whoa, how can that be? Because we're not talking about a scale of 1 to 100. We're talking about 15 over 37, right? So one example I've used in terms of the whole fastest growing thing is that for nearly 17 years in my household, my son and my daughter have been the fastest growing human beings in the household. They're still not as tall as I am. How is that? It's because they started at a low point and they're gradually catching up. Not quite there yet. My son might get there. We shall see. Okay? And so just to understand the nature of numbers of big versus small. So for the next graphic, and this is where I'm going to try to show this graphic clearly on my end. So let me do a screen share here. And is this showing up, Kristen, for folks to see for the below graphic?
Yeah, we're looking at the same
Okay,
screen.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, so for this graphic, good. So the percentage point difference between female and male voters was 7.2 in the 2016 election. So you can see that it was 53.6% of the voters were female, 46.4% were male, and so, okay, 53.5 to 46.5. Doesn't seem like a huge gap. but what percent more women than men voted in that election? So how would you go about doing this equation? I think this is a poll question, right?
Hmm.
So this is where it's important to keep in mind what's the numerator, what's the denominator. And the numerator is the difference that we're talking about, 7.2. And we're saying what percent more women than men. And so those words represent a formula, right, that is being expressed. 7.2 divided by, is it 46.4 or 53.6 that you should be doing the math by? And this is a common challenge. In the newsroom back in the 90s, I would have reporters come to me consistently and ask me, hey, Matt, if the budget's going from 20 to 25, what's the percentage increase? Because it's up by 5, do they divide by the earlier number that it's coming from, or do they divide by the number that it's going to? And the answer is you dividing, and you can close that in about, let's give 5 more seconds first. No, that's all right. 11 out of 19 voted. A preponderance voted. So this was about even. This is so funny. The answer, 6 answered one way, 5 answered the other, and those numbers mirror the actual equation. So, so the correct answer in this case is it's 7.2 divided by 46.4, because it's more women than men, and so men were 46.4. So that's the number that you're dividing it by, and so it's a 15.5% increase. Now, you could express it differently and say, what percent fewer men than women voted? And then the answer would be 13.4%. And so it is what it is. I'm going to move on rather than cause people to resent me too much further. But the then men part of that equation, of that sentence, is a tip off with the percentage of real voters. So I'm going to cough away from my mic. Hold on a moment. Okay. Knowing me, if I put it on mute, I would have shut down the whole program. Okay. So Go Olympics is now 2/3 the way through roughly. We're on to Infinite Intrigue. We're at 8:03 p.m. I'm going to zoom ahead a little quicker. So 1,000 times 1,000 is 1 million. 1 million times 1,000 is 1 billion. All right. If 1 million seconds equals 11.5 days, and it does, about how long is 1 billion seconds? This is the kind of stuff that's going to get you promotions at work, get all sorts of accolades in your life. So let's see if you can get this right. So 1 million, so it's really thinking about it, it's 11,500 days. So 11,500 days is how many years? About 3 years? It's about almost 32. Is it nearly 100 years? So this is a way to really kind of picture a million versus a billion, because most people, oh, it's a multimillionaire or a multi-billionaire. There's a big difference, right? So people are reluctant. I'm losing people on this. I think the percentage point discussion alienated people. Come on, folks, give it your best guess. Right now, the correct answer.
It's okay to guess.
It's okay to guess. I was joking about you middle school teachers. They're proud of you. Okay. All right, good. We're getting 11 out of 18 have voted. All right. So let's go where the answers are. And it is almost 32 years. So look at that. A majority, you got it right. Good job. And so it's just one way of expressing it. So just to keep in mind. But when we're talking about, you know, what's 1,000 billions is now a trillion, right? So it helps put into perspective things like national debt, right? Other things that are far out there, miles in the galaxy, you know, how many Earths can fit inside the sun, stuff like that, which isn't necessarily practical information, but it's a way of depicting it in a more clear way. All right. And so one thing that, another thing is to write these numbers out with all the zeros to help really see it, right? So really, really key. Let's move on to question number 15. It's a 62-word excerpt from March 4th when the campaign manager for Senator Warren gave a statement. And so I think that statement, I think this is going to be on the screen. Can you show that for us, Kristen?
I have the question about which age group is the fastest growing.
Oh, right. Yeah, this one is way too much. So let me say this. For later on, folks, I encourage you to look at this paragraph. I'll read it right now. Last night, we fell well short of our viability goals and projections. and we are disappointed in the results. We're still waiting for more results to come in to get a better sense of the final delegate math. And we also all know the race has been extremely volatile in recent weeks and days, with frontrunners changing at a pretty rapid pace. That paragraph is brimming with cuties, quantitative terms. There's not one digit that shows up, but there's math going on through every clause. And so it caught my eye when I saw it. I thought, I'm doing something on this topic. And so just to know that our language is steeped in numeracy. And so with that, let's go to the next question on common sense. So we're on the Gold Olympic, the C, common sense, and considering the below graph. And so this is the composition of American voters by age for presidential elections going back to 1980 when Reagan unseated Jimmy Carter. And so first question from this is, which age group is the fastest growing group of voters since, and I have on my sheet 1980. I think that's what it is for the poll. So if you look at these numbers, from the bottom is 1980 and all the way to the top is 2016. And at the top are the different age groups, 18 to 29, 30 to 44, 45 to 64, and then 65 and older, okay? So which age group is the fastest growing group of voters since 1980? And so the first thing to think about is, well, which one was a pretty small group, probably 1980? Because in order to be fastest growing, you typically need to be at a smaller number. And there's only two that I think that actually grow at all. So the fastest growing group, you've got, let's see, yeah, the two older groups, right? 32.5% to 37.6% for the 45 to 64s. And then the oldest age group went from 16.8 to 24.2. Okay, and so the answer is, and 65 and older, and 8 out of the 13 who voted or who cast their answers got that correct. And so to go from 16.8 to 24.2, that's like a 44 roughly % increase. All right, now the other group, it went up by around 15%. Okay, and the other two groups went down. And so the point is that that age group has been growing over time. And partly that's because of the demographic of our country as a whole. People are living longer. And so there's more older people who can still vote because the age expectancy is going up. Another thing to think about though, and this might be the next question in the poll, Kristen, if you want to move to that, which age group is the fastest growing group of voters since 2012? So that's a small horizon, and so it's less meaningful in my view because it's, okay, big whoop. We're talking about 2 election cycles. So from 2012 to 2016, again, in this case, there was only 2 groups that grew. There's the youngest group and the oldest group that grew. The other ones went down. And so we'll close the poll in a few moments. So you can see that the younger group went up by 0.3%, so about 2% increase. And then the oldest group went from 22.3 to 24.2. That's not quite 10% increase. And again, this was an evenly split. People were a little more unsure of this one, but 65 and older still is the oldest, or is the fastest growing group since 2012, okay? And so, but when you've got a set of 2, one's fastest growing, it's actually faster growing. I guess if you include the others because they went down, they're groups, and so it's fair still to say fastest, but the point is there's only 2 groups overall. Next question on the poll, that Kristen, I think if you can pop that one up, I believe is here. Yes, which age group has the greatest potential to become the fastest growing in the years to come? Is it the youngest group or the oldest group? The greatest potential to grow, okay? Now this is one of those where there's only 2 choices, which is rare. And this is where anyone that answers, in my view, can defend their answer pretty well. And so I know that a good number of people are voting for one of these, and I understand why. And I think it's probably the correct answer. I'm hedging on that though. And so 12 out of the 15 folks voting have voted. We can end the poll. Thank you. So 11 out of 12 said 18 to 29. And I can see where, because look, there's only 15.7. the other one's 24.2, you know, there's more room to grow when you're at 15.7. However, there's only a 12-year range with 18 to 29. It's actually 12 years, even though it looks like 11. It's 18 to 29.99999, right? 65 and older, there's no upper bound. And so as people get older in this country and are staying alive longer into the 80s and 90s and over 100 and still voting, because let's face it, people when they're older, they definitely vote. That is an established fact over time. They typically have more time to vote during the day. They're more engaged in general. And so even though that number is higher than it's 24 versus 16, there still is some potential for the oldest age group to continue to grow pretty strongly. Though I would agree though that they're kind of plateauing because, and also we have a pretty engaged younger demographic in our country these days. And so that's just a little bit of a digression. But one thing that I would just point out is this graph is a little bit old school, right? It's lumping age groups that are a little bit outdated because Social Security, as an example, people can wait till they're 70 and 1/2 year old before they claim Social Security now, right? And that number is going to keep getting nudged up as expectancy expands over time. And so it might be time for some of these entire charts to change and for us to go, maybe the next group is 65 to 79, and then 80 plus might be the next group to really start to tease out. So a little bit of a digression there, but let's move on to, oh, this one is fun. This one is based on an actual, something that happened in the early 90s. In March 2021, the mayor of any town releases statistics showing that sales tax revenue for the community grew 8% over the previous month. It's touted as proof that the mayor's leadership is helping turn the local economy around. Can you identify at least 2 holes in that claim? Okay. And so I don't think that this is a poll question, Kristen, right? But this is more philosophical to think about these things. Let's break this down. In March of 2021, this is next year, the mayor of this fictitious town releases these stats saying that the tax revenue for sales tax went up by 8% over the previous month. So one thing to look at, and this is where no one, I think one person finally caught on to this, but I've been doing this for a long time. People would say, well, you shouldn't be comparing month to month. It's too small a sample size. That's correct. That is a problem. You should do it by quarter, and you should do it by like quarters, like the first quarter of the year versus the first quarter of the previous year, in the previous 5 years or 10 years to really get, right? Because the previous year could have been high or low based on some factors that are an aberration from the norm, right? So you want to broaden the sample size. But another thing to think about is that the month of February, most years, 3 out of 4 years, is actually 10% less than March. There's 3 fewer days, right? And so, of course, there's going to be more sales tax revenue in March because there's more days. Another thing to think about is how many days fall on high retail days, Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays. And so based on where the weekend they fall in those months, it can skew the numbers even further. And so it's to really understand the smaller sample size you have, the more you can cherry pick something, the less weight that you should assign it, right? So those are just a couple of little holes in the claim. Another is, what does the mayor have got to do with it? His leadership turning the local economy around, right? People, can question what impact he or she may have had. So on to stats and such. This is the finale, the last letter of Go Olympics. And so let's go on to the next survey question, the poll. In the 2000 US presidential election, how many third-party candidates received more than 537 votes from Florida voters? So that was the margin of victory in Florida. That ultimately was decided at the US Supreme Court level as far as whether to accept certain ballots or not, and whether to basically say this election is over. So were there 3 third-party candidates? Were there 5? Or were there 8? And I'm not sure if people are using the chat room much, but if without peeking on Google and just tapping into your memory bank, I'd like to know who recalls who was the top third-party candidate that year. This person got around 2% of the vote, right? Got well in excess of 537 votes, got several dozens of thousands of votes. I don't even recall, okay? And so a Princeton graduate, if I'm not mistaken, who has done quite a bit of consumer advocacy over the years. And so we've got 71% of the folks voting, and we have 10 people have voted, and One person, the one person, so you can end the polling, Kristen. The person who said 8 is either looking at Wikipedia right now or just guessed correctly, or is as geeky as me and cares about such things. There are actually 8 third-party candidates, which means there was a 10th party candidate, right? 3rd through 10th party. And so that's not to say that that means if the people who voted for the 10th party candidate, if they just threw their votes in with Gore, Lieberman, then they would have won, because there's no guarantee that all of them would have voted for that, right? It would have been distributed among the other candidates. But it's just kind of interesting to show the impact that folks can make. So with that, let's go on to what I believe is either the penultimate or the penultimate ultimate question. George Washington was the United States. This is just a fun little pop culture thing. George Washington was the United States' first president, and Donald Trump is the 45th. Midway through that list, who is our 23rd president? Who is our median president?
We're definitely guessing now.
We're guessing a bunch of bearded guys, right? Lincoln was our first bearded president, and he didn't actually grow the beard until after he was elected. He grew it between his election and his inauguration, and back then the inauguration happened a full 4 months. It was March 4th of 1861 that he was inaugurated. That changed in the 1940s. So we got Rutherford Hayes as one possibility. Grover Cleveland, who was actually president twice, 2 different terms. That's why, yeah, we've had 44 presidents across 45 presidential administrations. All right, so we've had fun with this one. We've had 11 vote, and the winner, according to these 11 voters, is Rutherford Hayes, but the answer is Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was the sandwich in between Grover Cleveland's 22 and 24. Okay, all right, that's just a little pop culture fun. Anyone can look that up. So on to, this is the finale, the final question of Go Olympics, and it's related to this tweet. Now, actually, I'm gonna try to play this video, okay, that I pulled up earlier, and I hopefully have in the queue. So let me try to play this video, and let's do this, okay. Is this showing up?
We're still looking at the screen though.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me actually let me do this. Yeah, resume share. Okay, I'm gonna screen share. And is it on this now? On the Sky News?
No, you might need to stop share and reshare maybe.
Okay, hold on. New share. Here we go. Okay. Is this showing up?
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
I don't know that we have audio.
It's an incredible way of putting it. It's an incredible way.
I'm gonna go back. I realized I had my.
The money he spent.
Here we go.
Given every American $1 million. Got it. Let's put it up on the screen. When I read it tonight on social media, it kind of all became clear. Bloomberg spent $500 million on ads. U.S. population 327 million. Don't tell us if you're ahead of us on the math. He could have given each American $1 million and have had lunch money left over. It's an incredible way of putting it. It's an incredible way of putting it. It's true. It's disturbing. It's true, and it's disturbing. Hey, I'm moving to the US now as a political consultant. $1 million campaigning spent for every voter. I want some of that action. $500 million, 327 million people. That's about $1.50 each. So these journalists were only out by about $999,998.50 per vote. Still, that's closer than most of them got to pick in the last election.
Okay. Okay, touche on that one. Touche on that little remark. So, okay, hopefully that got through so people could see that and enjoy that punditry. And so let me do a screen share again. Here we are, and this is back to the Olympics. All right, so to the closest dollar, and by the way, that commentary by Brian Williams and his co-host there was based on this tweet by a woman who's a fashion writer. and not necessarily a mathematician. So to the closest dollar, how much could Mr. Bloomberg have actually given each American? So the commentator there said it was about $1.50, which doesn't tip off the correct answer here, right? It could be higher or lower. And so the bigger point here is that was just a total absence of mathematical consciousness. And it wasn't just the two on-air talent. It was the producer, it was the graphic artist. There was a bunch of people that were complicit in that major math gaffe. And so just be really careful of what you see out there in the media. That's an extreme example. So, all right, we've got 9 people who have answered. Let's get a few more. Come on, we've got a few holdouts who are getting the calculators out to divide. 500 million divided by 330, or 327, I think was the what the tweet indicated, right? And so, okay, we can close the polls now. And good job for the 5 folks. It's $1.53, so it's closer to $2 than $1. 5 people said that, 3 said $1, 1 person said $10. Clearly is well shy of $1 million each. And the larger point is, you know, I used to tell police officers all the time, you know what, don't tell me how old a suspect was, just give me their date of birth and I'll do the math. And I'll agree not to use a gun or to handcuff people. We'll stick with our respective skill sets, because police, you know, do a lot of good things, but one thing that they aren't necessarily adept at, depending on the department, is math. And so I would have people who are 2 or 3 years different from what the police say, and I'd see other reporters taking that number, and I'd be like, they're gonna have it wrong, but it's not their fault. All right, so the cumulative credibility we should automatically assign to someone who uses all caps, exclamation points, fancy words, or any other attention-getting devices is 0. Right? Just because someone is emphatic and passionate and pounding their fist doesn't mean they're right. It just means that they're doing those things. And so with that, we're reaching the point now of the program. I've got a little bit over of what I typically would like to do. So, so thanks for hanging with me, everyone, those who are still on board. I don't know what kind of questions might have come forth at this point, or if people have any right now that they want to pose. And I could also potentially, Kristen, we could maybe unmute people, though that I don't know if that's, I'm not sure if we can actually do that or if we want to do that. So.
Yeah, if someone would like to ask a question not in the chat, maybe let me know in the chat. Or you could also, I think there's a way to raise your hand and I can unmute you.
And I'm clicking allow to talk to people.
Okay, so it looks like, oh, okay.
If everyone could just make sure you keep your screen muted until you talk. I'm not sure if I'm able to do it. So unmute. So like Pam, I unmuted. Robert, unmute. I think I have. Wait
well,
a second.
I think, you know, if they, yeah, I guess if they want to talk, they can.
Yeah, disable talking. I'm not sure. So, and I'm also good at answering rhetorical questions that I could pose to myself, but I'd rather just pause. And so let me have a sip of water and any questions that people may have about anything I've talked about or anything that you wished I talked about, and we can discuss now. Okay. And I'm going to go into the chat box too and see if there's any particular note. Okay. Oh, we're saying. Oh, someone saying that. Okay. It was just a guess. So Kevin Wood saying something was just a guess. Okay, and thank you, Cindy, for your comment. Okay, that made you think. That is my goal, is to raise people's antenna more, and not to the point of where you become paralyzed, but also where you go, is this really something that I should, you know, agree with or you know, buy into right away? You know, my wife is an accountant working on TV shows and movies, though her background is as an actress. And that's the thing too, is just because someone has a label doesn't mean that they can't do something way over here, right? We're all pretty diverse. But back around 20 years ago, she caught something from a billing from some utility, and it was the interest rate, and it was on a monthly basis, and it made a big difference. And it was a real exorbitant interest rate. And so Jane Bryant Quinn, who's this financial author and columnist, pretty prominent and syndicated, she actually did a column on my wife's whole odyssey of calling out this utility and calling them to account. And so that was just, her one little anecdote about, about keeping your eye on the ball. What are we talking about? Is this per day, per month, per year, et cetera? And so here's a question from Robert. Was Steve Forbes the third-party candidate who gathered the most votes? Oh, no, it was actually Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader got about 2% of the vote in 2000. And so that's a good follow-up. Thank you for doing that. I used to have a column that was called By the Numbers, and I wrote for about a year and a half. That particular column, that kind of segued into my training in the early 2000s. And I explored a lot of these topics and a lot of these ways that numbers can be used to manipulate. And one example that comes to mind is the net versus the gross. Now, Art Buchwald was a columnist, syndicated columnist, and he, as you may or may not know, but the movie Coming to America with Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall in the early 90s, Art Buchwald sued the studio because he said that he wrote, I don't know if he wrote the screenplay or he wrote something that led to the creation of that movie. And he said he was owed a certain percentage of the proceeds. And the studio said, well, you get a percentage of the net. And they arranged their books in such a way that there was no net, or there was a very small net from that movie, and not the gross. And so, as lawyers know, one word or one comma can fundamentally change the entire equation. And so that's one thing. So Kevin with a comment / question. Some people might not have understood the bit about cuties, i.e. that is from QTs, right? So quantitative terms, if you say the letters QT, it becomes cutie. And so that's what I've coined them. So thank you for that observation. And your just a guess, was the answer of 8 for third-party candidates. And so, right. And so kind of like the Price is Right, which is, who's seen the Price is Right and gone, wait, why did that person do that bid? All you have to do is $1 more than that person, or bid $1 and don't go over. It's just a funny, observation about emotion versus logic. And sometimes in certain situations, especially when it comes to shopping, right, or time pressures, a lot of times we act on emotion more than on logic. And that's why it's important sometimes to have your spouse holding the checkbook. And when I say that, I'm not denigrating my spouse. I'm the one that's, anyway, I'll just shut up now. In 68 election won by Nixon, was silent majority or evangelicals the main driver for the 60% voter turnout? That's a good question. So the main driver, I don't know the answer to that. I've not read analyses on that to know. And even, but even the phrasing of that question, indicates, so there's subjectivity to that, right? Like trying to extract from certain anecdotes or certain portions of the country that may have voted more in 68 versus the prior few elections, and to infer from that, okay, there's more evangelicals, let's say, because in that part of the country there happens to be a bigger contingent. Sometimes that's a question of causality versus correlation, right? And so a lot of times, a lot of these expert insights, I'm not here to denigrate them, but to say that they're educated guesses a lot of times, right? Because it's impossible to truly know what was driving that. But the point is that those are two factors. And also, who constitutes silent majority? What does that mean? So there's a lot of I guess, interpretation that goes into that, for sure. One thing to think about too is that just in terms of data, think about the United States, in terms of population, that around 4 million babies are born every year in this country. And that was the case in the baby boom. From 46 to 64, around 4 million babies were born each year. There's around 74 million babies born during the baby boom. And we still have 4 million babies being born every year. Why are we not calling today's era a baby boom? When you think about it, it's because the base from which we're operating is so much bigger because of the past baby boom. So the raw numbers are still roughly the same, but the pool that it's drawn from has grown. And it's not necessarily, it's not the 327 million we're talking about, it's the number of women who are age bearing years, right? From teens into the 50s. And so, but by and large, 20s and 30s is the bulk of that. And so that's the real thing to look at as well. So it's to really understand what's the most salient data point or set of data points to think about. So there's a lot of books that I could recommend that I've enjoyed reading over the years. One is one author that's terrific is John Allen Paulus, Paulos, and John is he was a longtime Temple professor, and he's written several books, at least 5 or 6 books, but one of them is called A Mathematician Reads the Newspaper. Another is Innumeracy, which talks about the innumerate nature of our culture, kind of like being illiterate with numbers. And another one is called Once Upon a Number. And in Once Upon a Number, he makes a point that I've distilled in a lot of the times that I've shared Go Figure, and that is that the interplay between storytelling and numbers. And that in terms of when talking about numbers, if you're not going to at some point start to share a real compelling story, what's the point, right? That the numbers should start to tell a story of some kind. And on the flip side, when sharing a story, inevitably, pretty quickly and early on, numbers start to play a role, even if it's just to set the time or the space that we're talking about. And so it's just that inextricable link between stories and data, and data is embedded in all of our stories. So I'm going to come up for air and see if there's any other questions or comments. I've written in depth on a lot of these topics and more topics related to mathematics and storytelling. If you just type in my name, Go Figure on Google, you'll find those stories. We're now a little bit past 8:30. And so Kristen, is there anything else that you would want me to touch on or anything that you need to share in terms of programming for the library?
No, I thank you for those book recommendations. We obviously love those at the library, so I'll have to write those down and see if we've got them or if we can get them. We are starting to, I believe tomorrow, a lot of libraries within our network of libraries are going to start opting in to share between the libraries again. So if it's something we don't own, starting tomorrow, I believe, and I don't know how many libraries, but it seems like a good number, including Algonquin, will be sharing books with each other again. So so we'll be able to get some of those things through interlibrary loan again. So so if we don't have it, we may be able to get it for you. Looks like another
Yeah, it's me. I'm
another
typing in.
book. Oh, another book, Arithmetic of Life and Death. Okay.
And then How to Lie with Statistics, late 50s, was written. It's one of the seminal pieces on that. And I don't know if it's in print anymore or where you might find it, but that's another one. So these are all variations on the theme. One tip for people, this is mathematical, it's very practical. And I learned this in 1989. The closer you get to a destination, the less benefit you have of speeding, okay? So when you get closer to wherever you're going, if you happen to go over the speed limit by more than 10 miles an hour, start to ramp it down, because the number of moments you will save by still going 75 versus 65 is really small. So the time to get picked up for speeding is in the 3rd mile of a 3,000-mile journey. That's when you make up ground, okay? So that's actually in the book, The Arithmetic of Life and Death. He talks about that, and I can attest. I once drove 1,000 miles, and in the last mile, it's a construction zone, okay? And they reduced the speed limit, and I didn't reduce quick enough, and I got a ticket. So anyway, so thanks for indulging that little personal story, but hopefully that's of pragmatic use for the people who are still on the call.
All right. Well, thanks for all that you shared tonight, and I'm sure there's lots of more information on your website. So yeah, so people can get Google and find and read more. So.
Thank you. Yes, I will just type that in here so people know where to go.
Perfect.
And for the record, gofigure.com was not available. I realize it's a better URL. GoFigureMakingNumbersCount.com is the URL. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you to the library. I'm a passionate library fan. I was on the library board here in Oak Park for 4 years. And so, you know, my wife has actually told me, like, when we go on dates, we cannot go into any bookstores. It's off limits because that's my mistress. So, so I really appreciate all the work that you do and the programming that you provide, and I wish you and your colleagues the best through this time.
Thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. Yeah, maybe some of you on the call tonight, maybe we'll see you in the library soon. So have a good night, everyone.
Everyone, thanks for coming.
Bye.